you. When Martha said it was good to have Peter Elliott all the way from Vancouver, I was reminded of the great bulletin blooper that said, next Sunday, our speaker will be Bertha Belch, a missionary from Africa. Come hear Bertha Belch all the way from Africa. Anyway, it's good to be here, good to be back at St. George's Church here in St. Catharines. See so many friends. Let's get on with the homily. Jesus said, "Very truly I tell you, I am the gate. Very truly I tell you, I am the gate." So given that we're in an urban setting and lots of us have very little experience of sheep farming, I want to find another way into this text. So let's see a show of hands. How many of you have ever been in an airplane? Right, that's pretty much everyone. It's an amazing experience, isn't it? There's one aspect that always gets to me, and it's as you enter the plane. These days, at big airports, you rarely get down to the tarmac and walk up the stairs as you did in the olden days. No, there's this contraption called the jetway. The jetway that leads you from the terminal down this long tube-like passage and into the airplane. I think airlines want your experience to be as seamless as possible, and it is. You hardly know that you have crossed a threshold from the terminal to the jetway into the airplane, but indeed you have. It's almost imperceptible when you walk over that little way, and all of a sudden you're in a plane. You've crossed a threshold. They literally call it a gate at the airport. And you couldn't be in a more different place, could you? Because an airport's a big, kind of heavy building, usually, that doesn't normally lift off the ground. It's not supposed to. But airplanes can fly. And you move from one space into the other, across a threshold, but often without even realizing that you've crossed a threshold. Crossing a threshold, going through a gate, using imagery from sheep farming in John's Gospel, Jesus in today's Gospel reading offers one of the great I am statements. I am the gate. I am the gate. Now, to put this in context, before we explore this whole notion of gates and thresholds, let me refresh our memories about the I am statements from John's Gospel. There's 7 of them, the big 7. Jesus says, I am bread, light, gate, shepherd, resurrection and life, road or way, truth, and life, and vine. Those are the 7 great I am statements from John's Gospel. You see, the mystery of Christ is so complex. It takes many images, innumerable images, to convey its meaning. So when Jesus says, I am the gate, there are 2 parts of this assertion. One is I am, and the other is the gate, and we have to unpack them both. Now, the words I am, for the first hearers of John's Gospel, would immediately remind them of the name of God. Moses at the burning bush, you all remember that story, has to take off his sandals because he's on holy ground, and God tells him from the burning bush that Moses is the one to lead the children of Israel from slavery in Egypt into the promised land, and that he's the one to do this. And Moses says to the voice out of who should I say sent me? And the voice in the bush says, tell them I am sent you. I am who I am. That's the name of God. God's name in the Hebrew Bible can never be uttered. It's only consonants. And why is that? Because to name something, for humans to name something, is to control it. And the God of liberation, the God of creation, the God of freedom can never be domesticated or controlled by the human community. So God is simply being itself, the force of being itself. The great I am, or another translation is, I will be who I will be. That's the name of God. The flow, the very flow of life and being itself. So when Jesus says, I am the gate, he's not on some kind of ego trip, right? He is connecting the imagery of gate with the great I am. This is the incarnate God using very homely images to help us understand who God is. And today, in today's gospel, this is the God of the thresholds. The God of the thresholds. And here's the important part. Here's the important part. We meet God at the gates or the thresholds of our lives because of the Paschal mystery, the Easter proclamation, that God is always in the business of transformation. So in the same way that you are changed as you walk down that gateway and into the airplane, this is the business that God is in, always changing us, always moving us into new circumstances. At the gateway, at the transition times of our lives, we are always called from death to new life. We're always called from death to new life. And the incarnate God we know in Jesus Christ is there at the threshold, at the gate, at the passageway, beckoning you and me always into new life. So that's a lot of thoughts. Let me try to give you some examples. Well, example number one, this community here at St. George's Church, St. Catherine's. St. George's, as you celebrate 225 years, this anniversary, anniversaries like birthdays, which we're also going to celebrate today, begin as ways to look back and honor all that is in the past. But of course, it soon becomes a way to anticipate and envision a future. So this is a gateway year for you. This is a threshold year for you. You are passing into a new phase of life. And as you look back and reap the memories and joys of the past, you've been emboldened to take a step into a new future. As with Grace Church, you've forged a new partnership together with many members from St. James Meriton as well, calling you all more deeply into a new life. A new life here, a new life for all of you. And Grace Church, you wonderful folks, have also crossed a threshold, taking a huge step into a new territory, leaving behind a cherished holy place and finding the new life that's promised in the resurrection of Jesus Christ. You see, just like God called the children of Israel away from slavery in Egypt, God always calls us from the familiar to the unfamiliar. It's kind of uncomfortable, but that's kind of the way God is. Always calling us from the familiar into the unfamiliar, from death into life. Bless you, good people of Grace Church, for your courage and your vision. And may this threshold time for you be a learning time. Now, beyond the church, another few examples. These days are threshold days in so many ways. And let me just sketch out a few headlines. In terms of the environment, we're at a gateway of making choices that will either result in a continuation of the destruction of the earth, or, if we heed the calls, we can live more simply and more consciously, aware of the impact that humans have on this fragile earth, our island home. At this threshold time, in terms of the environment, we are quite literally being called, as the human race, from death into life. Another example, politically. Across the world, people are at a gateway of choice. either to embrace the diversity of the human family or retreat into a kind of xenophobia that blames, let's say, immigrants for the changing nature of the economy. And what we're hearing come through the ether of our social and political lives these days is a kind of mean-spirited, me-first attitude. We see this south of the border with the new administration. We see it emerging in Europe. It will be interesting to see what happens in France today, won't it? And you know what? It is murmuring not too far below the surface of towns and cities where economic change fuels attitudes toward the other that undermine our civility as Canadians. And in cities like this one, cities like St. Catharines, in the former industrial heartland of Canada, where economic changes have had such a huge impact on people's ability to make a good living, these are threshold days. How are we going to think about that? How are we going to think about it? What does it mean to be part of a shared humanity that includes people from many parts of the world seeking to build a life together in this community? Can we share enough? Can we develop economic models enough so that everyone is included? Because, there's enough for everyone. There's absolutely enough for everyone if we only share. If we share more generously with each other. At these thresholds, these gates, these changing circumstances, we're always being called into the Paschal mystery to move from death to new life. And finally, for all of us who are moving through life, perhaps uncertain about what's going to come next, and let's face it, who can be certain about what's coming next in life? You never know. Know this: the one who has loved you from before time, the one who visited us in Jesus Christ, the one whose Spirit surrounds and enlivens us, this is the God of the thresholds, who accompanies us through the unexpected circumstances of our lives, inviting us always and evermore to embrace the journey from death to life, from death to new life. The late, great Irish poet and theologian John O'Donoghue has written extensively about thresholds, the gateways of our lives. And here are some words from him about this important passageway. O'Donoghue writes, "At any time, you can ask yourself, at which threshold am I now standing? What am I leaving? Where am I about to enter? What is preventing me from crossing my next threshold?" A threshold is not a simple boundary. It is a frontier that divides two different territories. To acknowledge and cross a new threshold is always a challenge. Sometimes a threshold opens suddenly in front of you, one for which you had no preparation. This could be illness, suffering, or loss. It takes only a couple of seconds for a life to change irrevocably. Suddenly you stand on completely strange ground, and a new course of life has to be embraced. Think for a moment how, across the world right now, someone's life has just changed, irrevocably, permanently, and not necessarily for the better. And everything that was once so steady, so reliable, must now find a new way of unfolding. We never know when we are asked, when we're called to cross the next threshold of our life. Like walking from a jetway into an airplane. The thresholds of our lives can at first seem imperceptible. But when we do cross over them, we've moved into a whole different space. And the gospel today reminds us that we can find God. Indeed, Jesus uses the absolute metaphor, I am the gate, I am the threshold. God is indeed in the very deep transitions of our lives, beckoning us always to move from death to new life. And as we lean into the power of God, we find the strength and courage to take the next steps in our life's journey. In 1939, at the height of the Second World War, a young Princess Elizabeth handed her father, the reluctant King George VI, a verse she had discovered in her reading. In the King's Christmas broadcast of that same year, he read this verse, and it continues to speak to us today, especially in the changing seasons of our world and of our lives. The King read these words, "And I said to the man who stood at the gate of the year, 'Give me a light that I may tread safely into the unknown.' And he replied, 'Go out into the darkness and put your hand into the hand of God. That shall be to you better than light and safer than a known way.'" Through the darkness, into the light. Through the gates of our lives, the God of the thresholds is always there. Today, as we come forward to receive the bread and wine of this Holy Eucharist, may we be given the strength we need to ever embrace the new life that's given to us in Jesus Christ, who is the gate, the Good Shepherd, the bread of life, the hope of the world, the one who promises us abundant life now and forevermore. Alleluia, Christ is risen.